All right.
Hello, everybody. Here we are. It's Friday and April 5th, and we're talking about psychedelics today. Luke Jensen is working in Peru, and he has down there an ayahuasca clinic, what we would call a clinic, and there are many clinics down there that do ayahuasca, and they have shamans there who conduct the services. Some of the clinics have psychologists or people oriented in that direction running them. Luke has worked at them all, and he has a lot of experience with ayahuasca personally and with the shamans down there personally. He knows several of them, and he'll talk about that. And New Mind has been helping him uh, get things, do this study. We've helped provide him with equipment and so forth. And he's mapping pre and post people on ayahuasca and other plant medicines to see what changes immediately as a result of the whole system of doing the drugs and the plants and what effect they have in them. And we're interested also in the culture down there and how the shaman relates to the plant medicines. So it's not a laboratory thing. It's more of studying the traditional approach. So without further ado, I'll let Luke tell you all about it.
Hey, thanks for being present today. So yeah, this is a study of ayahuasca in Peru. First, I'm going to introduce myself. Then I'm going to go into my own personal story a little bit. And then I'll do a presentation on what we've discovered so far on our first study of Peru. And this was published in the New Mind Journal. So this is the first study that we published on ayahuasca. And then we'll go into some insights. So to start off, I have a William Blake quote. In the universe, there are things that are known, things that are unknown, and in between there are doors. And I really like this quote because Blake was a philosopher. He was a profound proponent of the imagination and using these other faculties of our being, of our mind that aren't conventional, that's not just analytical, to access different states. And eventually, the doors of perception was named after some of his ideas. So that's why the doors of perception by Aldous Huxley is named after some of my ideas. So to go on, we look at, I think ayahuasca is one of these doors. We can see things in a different way. So a little bit myself, I joined the military right after high school, 2 years after 9/11. I considered it my patriotic duty at the time. And eventually I was in the Marine Corps for eight years. And I switched to the National Guard. I joined an airborne infantry unit to deploy to Afghanistan. Up to this point, I never deployed. I wanted that experience. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. My deployment was very interesting in many ways. I was in infantry, so I was outside the wire every day, training the military, training the police. Many people to deploy, stay on base, and don't get experience the country. I experienced the country and interacted with people, and I really enjoyed all those experiences. At the same time, I became disenchanted with the mission. I had some experiences where I thought, well, basically gave me a sense that the mission was not what the politicians were telling us. And it's kind of led to a crisis within myself where I was looking for something different. My whole life was geared towards this goal of being in the military. Eventually, I wanted to become an infantry officer, but after deployment, I was very lost. I experienced symptoms of PTSD. I had experienced extreme anxiety, and I was looking for direction more than anything. So they say that ayahuasca calls to people, and ayahuasca started being mentioned in a number of different places. And I decided I decided that I don't know what's going on, I don't know where I'm going. So I'll try that. So I went to experience ayahuasca the first time in 2014. And it's still pretty new at the time. Most people have not heard of ayahuasca, though it was growing and expanding. It was not as well known as today. So since then, I've been involved with ayahuasca one way or another, and currently I do QEEG brain mapping with different kinds of plant medicines, ayahuasca, wachuma, and different kinds of research. So to start off, for people that don't know, many people have probably heard the word ayahuasca, but many people probably don't know exactly what it is. But ayahuasca is a plant brew that combines the chacruna leaf and the ayahuasca vine. Both these together make the brew we call ayahuasca. We call these psychedelics, or maybe even drugs, but for the indigenous people, these are profoundly spiritual plants. And in Peru, we call these plant medicines or ethnogens. And ethnogens is the term, I think, from the Greek that implies a spirit, a spiritual plant, a spiritual experience coming from a plant. So now this is becoming much more tourism down to Peru and other places to experience ayahuasca for spiritual healing. Uh, this is becoming more and more prominent for people looking alternatives to the standard Western model. So first, I'll go into my experience. When I arrived in 2014, I had never experienced any psychedelic before. I was in the Marine Corps, so the most we did was, go out to the bars and drink and things like this. So this was a whole new world for me that I had really no idea what I was getting into. I read a lot of books on it. I was excited about what I was going to do, but also there's a great unknown to what you're going to do. So the first experience, I flew into Iquitos. It's a city in the Amazon. It's the largest city in the world. You cannot reach by plane or cannot reach by road. You can only reach by plane or boat. So it was very Indiana Jones-esque when you fly into this city and experience this whole different culture and kind of jungle city life with all these motos going around. And our first hotel had this little parrot there and just things you don't usually experience. And then we took these canoes or boats, I guess. They look like canoes with an engine in the back. We took them to the deep jungle, about 4 hours out from Iquitos, to all the old growth jungle where there's no logging. So with jungle trees that are 400 or 500 years old, and there was monkeys, there was crocodiles, there was all these different things. So just being here, just being in the jungle, the deep jungle, was a very profound experience and very much life changing. Just that, and then after a couple of nights of being there and adjusting, we had our first night of ayahuasca. And so there's a saying in the ayahuasca community that ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want. And my first experience, actually, nothing happened. And I prepared for 6 weeks for my first experience. And you take ayahuasca in the dark, always after sunset. And it's quiet. At the time, there's about 12 people in the room. The room's a temple, but we call it a moloka. It's this beautiful wooden structure. And it's just amazing how they built these things. But it's a wooden structure and it's in the dark and everyone takes ayahuasca. And for me, I thought everyone was having the same experience I was having, but it turns out after the lights come on, actually the candles were lit. My friend that came with me, I did come down with a friend. He said he had confirmation of the afterlife. Another person I knew from that came down from Florida, he said he was cured from his addiction to Percocets. So all these people had these profound experiences, but at this point, I didn't yet. And looking back on it, sometimes it takes time for ayahuasca to work through your system. So the second night, they gave me a larger dose. It comes as a drink. So I drank the ayahuasca brew and I could feel something coming on. So I was walking to my mat and I first I better go to the bathroom because something's coming on. I'm not sure what yet, but something's coming on. So I walked to the latrine and these ayahuasca retreats in the jungle, they're all on stilts, 20 feet in the air. This is because the jungle floods, but it makes for this very profound and even eerie experience because I'm walking on this walkway and there's no artificial light at all. It's just the Milky Way above. And walking down this walkway. It felt like I was on a sailing ship or something similar. It felt like I was swaying. And I walk into the latrine and it's all wooden walls, and I see colors going up through these walls that I've never seen before. And I realized, well, okay, something's happening here. So I walk back out, I walk across the walkway, and what they say is you want to stay in the maloka or the temple because it's protected space. Not necessarily the space outside's bad, but there's energies that, are not controlled and protected like in the maloka. So if you want to stay out there for a bit, go ahead, but make sure you come back in. So I'm like, okay, I want to look at the jungle really quick. So I look at the jungle, and I look over the side, I look at the jungle, and the best way I can describe this is like the movie Avatar. And there's no real words for this, but this is the best description I can give. Everything had the bright colors and blues and hues, and I can see the energy coming off the whole jungle. And underneath the jungle, there was all these red lines of energy going through everything. And there's this profound sense of oneness and wholeness. At the same time, in the sky, the stars had the same kind of energy lines going through them. And both the jungle and the stars, this energy met in the horizon. And what I felt was this profound sense of spiritual awe. And I was raised Catholic, and I've always been a reader, so I knew these kind of experiences happen to saints and things like this, but I've never come close to experiencing such an experience. And here was happening, this sense of awe, this sense of oneness, this sense of unity, and sense of love and connection. And as I'm looking out into the jungle, part of the ayahuasca experience is what we call purging. It's vomiting or throwing up. And what they say is that you're releasing energy. That's what I've read. So this is all of a sudden I feel this urge to purge, and I vomit over the side. Like I said, I was on this walkway 20 feet in the air or 20 feet above the ground. And what I see is the earth opening up and this huge hole in the earth opening up, and it's bright green, and this black liquid coming out of my mouth and going 1,000 miles as far as I could see into the earth. And this profound sense that the earth was taking in all this negative energy from the military and from the rest of my life that I've accumulated, that was taking in this accumulation of negative energy, negative feeling that sticks to you over time. And it took it into itself. And after this, I'm reeling from this experience. I step back, just like, wow, what is this? And I go back into the Maloka, and the shamans sing ikros, their spiritual songs, and I'm swaying, and for the first time, I see auras. I see the shaman healing people remotely with energy going across the room, and it's just this profound experience. And I wake up the next day just kind of in disbelief by what I just experienced, because I've never experienced anything like this. And I would say that I didn't really believe in things like this. So in the last day of the retreat, I'm on one of these walkways overlooking the jungle, overlooking this distance of the jungle. And the same thing, there's the Milky Way in the sky. There's no light pollution. So it's just really, really just profound and beautiful just being this sort of nature. And I realized that my life is going to take a much different course than I thought it was. And I also realized that reality as I knew it was much different than what I believed in the past. So after this, it's a number of years go on, and it takes me a while to assimilate these experiences and integrate them into my ideas of reality and what I know to be real and what is the nature of the human condition. So I started traveling back and forth to Peru for a number of years. I think it was 2 years after that I went back to Peru. And then I started doing, I went to the normal retreats that most people go to, the big retreats that are well known and you see online, you can see reviews. But eventually I met the shamans themselves, and I started living in the jungle with the shamans, really, really deep in the jungle, living with the tribes. And I would live out there for months at a time, and it really felt like I was on the edge of the world. We had no electricity, no running water. There's a river that we pull water from, and our only water we could use was for drinking, or we could use 2 buckets to shower each day. And the jungle is very hot, so it would have been nice to have more buckets. But actually, I think these experiences, what we consider a lack, actually added to what I would call the magical experience of the plant medicines, because you had nothing to do but be by yourself and be your own thoughts. There was no cell phone reception, there was no technology, and every other night we had ayahuasca ceremonies. And these ceremonies were very, very powerful, and I had many insights and many profound sense of healing, and it gave me a whole different perception of the universe and where we're at. And here I was living this tribe, just kind of wondering, how I got here. But I believe the universe takes you interesting ways, and I started seeing these synchronicities in my life and things that brought me to the jungle and brought me to different people and the people I met. So over time, Peru started becoming more my home, and these experiences they're having felt more real than what I considered my reality before that in the United States. The lifestyle of having a job and paying your mortgage and traveling back and forth to work. These experiences, that life seemed very, very far away at that moment when I was living in the jungle. So eventually, I started coming back and forth because I still had to work at the time. I had no way of making a living in the Amazon, and a friend in Nebraska was doing neurotherapy, and she talked to me about, she actually brain mapped me, and it was really an interesting experience because she showed that I had a brain pattern for anxiety, PTSD, and for me being a Marine, being a military veteran, I wasn't the kind of person to talk about my problems or to talk therapy, and I definitely didn't want to go the VA route because I didn't want to be prescribed drugs, because even back then, and all these things had their place, but I was more on a natural path. So I found the brain mapping extremely interesting, and I bought all the books I could on the topic and started reading about it. I realized that brain mapping and things like neurotherapy and neurofeedback have many spiritual implications. So eventually I went to the ISNR right before the COVID pandemic, and I just had an idea, and eventually I met Dr. Suter and I told him about, hey, I think it'd be interesting to use brain mapping and with plant medicines. And Dr. Suter was really excited. He said that, this is a similar passion of his and he'd love to work with me. And Dr. Suter started mentoring me, and it's been a really profound relationship since then. So eventually, right after the lockdowns ended, I went immediately back to the jungle, with my QEEG technology I had at the time. And there's a picture of my first day back after the lockdowns. And I was 5 weeks in the jungle at this point, doing 3 ceremonies a week on a dieta. So a dieta is a special diet where you don't even eat vegetables. You basically just drink ayahuasca, eat some starches, and there's no salt in the diet. So it's almost like going through what I would call a spiritual boot camp, because it's very, very challenging and it's, in many ways stressful. So I was here in the jungle and I felt all this energy being released, being very energetically cleaning. All the things I built up for the last couple of years were being cleaned out. And this is when I first started experimenting with the QEG brain mapping and started working with people with the technology. I started working on a small scale at first, just doing different expats that live in the valley, and just started brain mapping people for free, actually, just to get experience doing it. Many people came in were interested in it, and the brain map themselves can be so powerful because it gives the people an idea of what they're dealing with. So we would give advice about nutrition, different kinds of meditations, and things to improve their lives. So soon after that, I started reaching out to different retreat centers, telling them what I do, And actually, a friend I met a couple years ago, he was the first person to become really interested in it. And he runs what's he called a sacred creativity retreat. So his retreats specialize in ayahuasca and creativity, like art, music, things like this. And this was our first study. We brain mapped everyone pre and post with this retreat. And this picture here, this is the Sacred Valley of Peru. It's a very beautiful place. So now, a little of my background, my experience with ayahuasca. We're going to today's study presentation. So we partnered with a small ayahuasca retreat in the Sacred Valley. This is the one I just mentioned. It was a creativity retreat. This took place at Mane Sanko Retreat Center, this beautiful yoga retreat. They call it yoga, but they host all kinds of different retreats. So they host yoga, they host plant medicines and different things like this. So in today's presentation, we brain mapped each participant pre and post, and we also did a cognitive emotional checklist, which we're really happy we did because this validated many of the findings we saw on the brain map. So to our knowledge, there's been brain mapping studies that have happened that they do during the experience of ayahuasca, but so far no one's tracked changes over time. So no one has tracked pre and post maps and seen those changes. This is the first step, as far as we can tell, that we know of. So the findings, each participant experienced a significant change in neuroplasticity as measured by the New Mind mapping system. So we expected there to be changes in anxiety, depression, because many questionnaire studies have found that, but we also found many other impacts as well. Also, I was kind of expecting that ayahuasca would move everyone in a similar direction, but actually it moved everyone in a way that they were needed. So wherever they're dysregulated, it seemed to help regulate in a positive direction. So going to the literature and the review of what other studies have found is really beautiful because we're entering a new renaissance in psychedelics. For a number of decades, there's no research whatsoever, and any kind of psychedelics or plant medicines were considered a class 1 substance, or they couldn't even be studied, basically. So now, finally, research is starting to happen. The medical community started looking at it, and it's interesting too because much of this stuff is coming from the ground up, from podcasters, from people who have experienced it. So it's not necessarily coming from the top down, it's coming from the popular culture saying like, hey, these things can be powerful, it's changed my life. And now finally the medical community, the research community is starting to look at this. I also want to point out that there has not been negative health effects associated with ayahuasca or psychedelics. Actually, it's associated with positive psychological health. So it's associated with a significant reduction in suicidal thoughts and psychological distress. And there's been no studies associated with either negative health findings or negative psychological health. So as all this is going on, it's important to note that new paradigms take time, that these things don't happen overnight. Usually the core group that starts this new paradigm, that starts looking into this and starts researching this and starts partaking in this, and eventually it takes decades or more for the consensus reality to look at this and say, okay, this is really a path of healing, or whatever the paradigm may be. So it's also important to note that this study, unlike many previous studies, this is non-clinical setting. So many previous studies, they give you the active alkaloid in a clinical setting, and they observe you under very strict conditions. So we did this basically in the field with a shaman. There's music, there's songs. It's not controlled, but we believe that this adds potential insight into the healing process because all these things go together. We're not looking to do this in the standard clinical way. We're looking to see this we're looking at the wholeness of the ayahuasca experience. We don't want to isolate a single alkaloid or a single part of the experience because we want to see how the whole thing affects people. There's been other observers that the ayahuasca experience in a natural setting is likely to increase the healing of the individual. And we want to explore different methods because we think that, or I believe that the standard Western model of healing is very linear, and we should look at different ways of healing the wholeness of the individual, and we can learn many things in the natural setting. So many people will call ayahuasca a psychedelic or a drug, but in actuality, for the people that use them in the jungle, these are sacred plants, and these ceremonies are sacred proceedings, and they're highly complex. The shaman will sing Icaros, different songs, depending on the feelings in the room, depending on what he feels on the energy. And for them, it's spiritual and energy medicine. They might even have these terms, to be honest, because it's just so, it is what it is. That's how they think of it. But this has many parallels in other traditions, such as chi and prana in different traditions. So it's worth noting that what we call energy healing has been observed and part of cultures all around the world from ancient times. So in the Shipibo tradition is what we work with, the shamans I've worked with, the plants, the true healers, the shaman's a facilitator. The plants work through the shaman, and the shaman is just a vehicle for the healing. The shaman sings Icaros, like I mentioned, they're sacred songs, and they remove dirty energy. So this could be considered similar to maybe different kinds of energy healing, like Reiki or different kinds of, Reiki or pranic healing, things like this. From my experience, ayahuasca shamanism is much more profound. Not to say these things don't have they all have their place, but ayahuasca shamanism, very striking visions and these profound spiritual experiences that I have not had in other methods of healing. So I think it's also important to note that in modern society, modern civilization, that there's this lack of meaning that's affecting all Western populations as a whole, and that people feel this lack of meaning. And this lack of meaning is a spiritual sickness that at least the Shipibo and people in these shamanic traditions look at a spiritual sickness that requires spiritual solutions and spiritual healing from. So in the West, people are looking for this divine feeling, this divine quest. And throughout the world, meditation, shamanism, prayer, and other methods have been used for this healing, for this quest for the divine, for this insight into nature and reality. And we're seeing this new renaissance, like I said before, of this connection to the divine, to the spiritual. It's also been documented that these spiritual experiences aren't just we can measure psychological changes, that we can know from surveys that these experiences can often change people's lives and send people in complete different directions, that these sudden spiritual experiences or acute spiritual experience can have profound impact on people's life and their psychological health. So we know these experiences can be very, very profound. So the previous work on QEEG brain mapping ayahuasca, most of the brain mapping has been done during the experience. Obviously, when you take a psychedelic, we know something happens during the experience, but so far, no one's tracked this over time, as far as we know. So the purpose of this study is to track changes over time, and with the addition of the self-reporting of the CEC to see what we can discover. So it's interesting to note that there's been some talk about the default mode network with previous psychedelic studies. There's evidence that the default mode network is suppressed during other psychedelics, and that other studies have mentioned psychedelic mushrooms have suppressed the default mode network. So this might be an interesting part of the process that's happening in the neurostructures of the brain with psychedelics. This is an image I pulled from a different study, and it shows that meditation and psilocybin both have affect the default mode network, and both deactivate in a certain way that may lead to these transcendental experiences. Because when the default mode network is suppressed by psilocybin, the sense of oneness of the universe becomes possible result of this. There's no differentiation or less differentiation between the self and the world around the person. So the study consisted of 5 people, 2 men and 3 women, ranged from the age of 25 to 46. We had 1 subject from Australia, the rest from the United States, and all subjects participated in an ayahuasca creativity retreat by the CEO of Leadership at Delix. The study was conducted at Monte Sanco, the retreat center in Sacred Valley. Each participant took part in 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, 3 days in a row. So often these ceremonies are divided up, but they did 3 in a row, which can be very energy intensive. Ayahuasca is also energy work, so people get tired and worn out just from the psychological processes and the energy work that's involved. So I mentioned this previously, but the most interesting thing is that each person's brain moved in a way that was what we call a needed direction. Where they were dysregulated at, it seems they became more regulated. So often people with low power gained power, people with overactive brains were calmed. This is what we observed so far in this initial study. Also, each person experienced a significant amount of neuroplasticity, and this neuroplasticity was measured by the new mind mapping system. Each person also took part in a CEC cognitive checklist that helped evaluate mood and other cognitive characteristics. So now I'm going to go through each person just one by one. We had 5 people. The first person was a Marine Corps veteran, had a 48% change in plasticity and a 44% change in normalization. This was after 3 days of ayahuasca. And this person just told me that he felt much, much better, overall sense of well-being and just positive outlook towards life. We can see his network connections. He was very hyper connected in the first, his pre-brain map, and his post-brain map, we saw a calming. And we see some hypo connection here. And we believe over time, maybe in a week or 2, we'd see this move more towards a norm. But we see this profound change in network connections. And before he said he's very, very stressed. And now we see that he felt very calm, and the brain map matched that, the network connections. This was a CEC assessment. In a CEC, he had 3 measurements outside norm before the ayahuasca retreat, and everything became well within norm afterwards, except for impulsive. Interestingly, we see that impulsive is usually the one measurement that stays out of norm if it's out of norm in the pre-assessment. Subject 2 was a 41-year-old female. She had a 53% change in plasticity and 44% change in normalization. She had low powered alpha in the pre-map, and this low power in alpha was completely gone in the post-map, or almost completely gone. Also, she had a overall, the alpha band was low from 8 to 12 hertz. She was in the lower end in the dominant frequency, and this normalized in the post-map after 3 days. Also in the pre-map, she had a high rate of hypoconnection, and this moved into a normative range in the post-map. So we can see this high alpha in the middle here was much reduced. Sometimes we see delta go up in the post-map, and this we believe is because all the energy work, people are extremely tired. After 3 ceremonies of ayahuasca, they're up really late at night, often to like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and usually wake up at 7, 8 in the morning. So they're only getting a few hours of sleep a night. And often they feel fine, but this may be reflecting the brain map. So this might be some of the high delta we're seeing. But we see this alpha improve a lot in the post map. Also, we see this connectivity change on the post map. Subject 3 was a 30-year-old female. She had 34% change in plasticity and a 53% change in normalization. Additionally, sometimes the eyes open map even changes more. So we saw a 53% change in plasticity in eyes open map and a 65% change in normalization in eyes open map. She also had a self-reported history of head trauma, and she had high delta in the pre-map. In the post-map, the high delta was greatly reduced. There's also a significant normative increase in alpha asymmetry and a moderate increase in normative beta AM symmetry. So we can see this high delta here in the pre-map, and the delta's almost gone in the post-map, and the alpha also improved. Interestingly, there's some research going on with head trauma, especially with veterans, and how plant medicines can help them out. And from this preliminary research, it seems to be that plant medicines can help out. And actually, I was talking to this person, and she said that she felt the plants working on her brain, healing her. So sometimes the people with head trauma actually feel the spirits, the plants actually helping out, healing the brain. So here's her eyes open map. We see all this change in the eyes open map. We do see this high frontal alpha. Sometimes this may be a result of the plants. We're not really sure about that, what's going on completely with everything that we're observing. So this might be a temporary pattern. Also, sometimes when the powers levels go up, we believe that other patterns that were beneath the low power pattern can present themselves. So this might be a temporary pattern, or this might be something else that we want to work on over time in the future. Subject 4 is a 26-year-old male, had a 47% change in plasticity and a 46% change in normalization. I found this person really interesting because so far this has not been reported yet, but he had a self-reported symptoms of attention difficulty, of ADD in his pre-CEC, and after the post-CEC, these were completely absent. And the pre-map, he had high theta in the pre-map, and the high theta was completely normalized in the post-map. So this person said he was ADD in the pre-map, and his CEC matched those symptoms, and that was gone in the post-map. We'll see that here. So this high theta you see in the pre-map was completely gone in the post-map. Also, this alpha, high alpha in the pre-map was greatly reduced in the post-map. And also we see this high beta in the pre-map was reduced or gone in the post-map. And we see here that his attention was the one thing out of norm in the CEC pre-assessment, and it was well within norm in the post-assessment, and everything else improved as well. Subject 5 is a 25-year-old female. She had 39% change in plasticity and 25% change in normalization. In her eyes open map, 41% change in plasticity and a 57% change in normalization. We had a high posterior alpha in the pre-map and a swim away in the post-map. There's also a strong change in alpha dominant frequency. So we had a little alpha in the posterior, and this was gone in the post-map. Also, there was a reduction in power levels. And we see this sometimes after plant medicines, this bleed, because there's so much energy work that the brain gets a little tired. She did not have the same profound change as other people, but she definitely reported feeling better after taking ayahuasca for 3 days in a row. And the CEC, we see this, that most of her measurements went to norm. Once again, impulsivity was still a little out of norm, but there's a large shift. And there's a large shift in the alpha dominant frequency. So the overall health of the brain was moving in the right direction. So insights. I think spiritual healing is very much part of the healing process. And I think that when you look at different ways of spiritual healing, Jung considered most psychological disorders to be at root spiritual problems. And this is where shamanism can be so impactful. It's a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. And I think veterans coming from war, I think it might be more accurate to look at these as spiritual wounds the wounds of war are more spiritual wounds than people give credit to in the modern consensus of medical academia.
That's interesting, Luke. This is Rob. I had a conversation last night with several people who had relatives that were fighting in World War II or the Korean War, and most of them refused to talk about those experiences. They were probably just too painful. That makes some sense to me that they would do it that way if you're a vet.
Yeah, no, and being a vet, I like working with veterans because, well, one, I think it's really healthy for veterans to have someone in the ayahuasca retreat that knows what they're going through. But I think, yeah, the wounds of war, these
Hmm.
we call these things trauma, but trauma is just a label. I mean, these are often spiritual wounds, and I think shamanism can often be the have profound impact on people with these
Yeah,
spiritual wounds.
yeah. Just to also give you the heads up, it's 10 minutes to the hour, and just wanted to give you that heads up as well.
All right, sounds good. I'll have a few more minutes here, and we can do questions.
Yeah, great.
It's stupid because you know what? They need it. I need it.
So everyone has received their spiritual wounds going through their life, whether we call them that or not. From my experience, veterans, there's this emphasis of war that these are actually spiritual wounds. And in the past, all societies looked at these wounds as spiritual wounds. And it's just the modern day psychology has its place, but we've psychologized so much of the human experience that takes away from that individual experience and that spiritual experience. And what the shamans call healing soul loss. This is a common practice throughout um, all ancient cultures, restoring the person to their original soul self. So as veterans, I think we need to start telling our own story. Myself and other veterans, I think after Vietnam, we had movies like Apocalypse Now and Platoon, and as a culture, people are coming to terms with what happened in Vietnam. You know, are we really the good guys? What do we do? How this happened? This hasn't happened since the War on Terror. So I think as veterans, we really need to come together and start telling our own stories because in telling stories, that's a path of healing. So we're doing this here in Peru, and we're working with veterans to help them tell their own stories and put their own story. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than storytelling because we're all stories. I'd like to end with this quote. The most important question anyone can ask is what myth am I living? And I think it's a profound statement, a profound question. And this is why I love Jung. What myth are we living? Every one of us is living a myth. And how do you want to choose to live that myth and to have that reflection on our lives as a myth? It can be so powerful. So, and that's it. Here's some alpacas from Peru and then from the mountains. And if there's any questions, I'm ready to go.
We'll get people unmuted. It'll take Richard just a second. In the meantime, one question that probably will come up is, okay, we're all here in America. You're down in Peru, and not everybody can get down to the Amazon to have that experience. What are the potential in the future for these sorts of experiences to be brought to somewhere here in the USA,
Well,
if at all?
actually, there's actually much going on in the United States right now. A lot of it's underground and not talked about.
Hmm.
But this is becoming more open. But I know there's veteran communities right now that are doing ayahuasca in the States, especially in places like the Northwest. I have a friend that does ayahuasca in the Northwest in Washington State. I think there's places in Colorado as well.
Yeah.
Some cities like Austin. And I think the laws are starting to change too. So as the laws start changing, you'll see more of a movement in this direction. My concern is, from my standpoint, I look at the shamanic experience as a spiritual experience. I'm concerned about the psychologizing of the experience from
Hmm.
my perspective.
No, that makes total sense, especially when we're talking about it from a spiritual aspect, because people think of it as trauma, like you were saying, versus one's own spiritual values. I've just killed somebody, or I've just experienced someone being shot, or I've just whatever, those things that deal with more of that spiritual end of things than just the psychological end of things. But I'm going to let other people ask questions of you because we have limited time and I don't want to hog the show.
Yeah, you bet.
This is Rodney. I have 35 veteran clients right now, and I was talking to somebody last that did a ayahuasca in a private home outside of Austin, Texas, just a couple weeks ago. Had a profound experience. but I'm very interested in helping the veterans. And it's hard to find a place that they can go repeatedly if they needed help in the United States. But that wasn't my question. He told me something about the music, and one of the pacings that they were doing was 6 beats per second on a drum, besides some powerful music. And I was just wondering if the rhythm has some helpful effect for the experience.
Yeah, no, I with the tribes I've worked with, they just do singing usually, but sometimes other people I've worked with do drums, and I think yes, that's definitely profound. I think drumming itself can be so powerful that 6 beats per minute, or that 6 beats can really bring people down to these deep states as well. So shamanic drumming is probably
6 beats
its
per
own.
second.
Okay, yeah, 6 beats per second is probably its own shamanic um, mm, tool besides plant medicines. I think it'd be very powerful.
It just seems that 6 beats per second, Dr. Cedar can, or Rob can probably edify this, but seems to match the 6 hertz. That would be theta state, like a dreamscape or something like that. If I might be off, but just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's right in the theta state. So I think what we do with technology, like alpha theta, can be achieved through shamanic drumming, and that's probably the traditional way of achieving these states.
Okay, good. Thank you, Luke.
They're using sort of like almost like a drum roll on a snare drum that you might see a drummer do really quickly in a song, but they're doing that in a repetitive fashion.
Yeah, no, I
I'm
think
just,
shamanic drumming is very powerful. It can be really helpful.
yeah,
One of
I
the
agree. I
one
mean,
of the
drumming is very powerful. Go ahead.
one of the comments I have too is I have several veterans from the Vietnam era, and when they got spit on when they came back and they landed in planes and people kind of stepped back as if they were some kind of alien or danger, they had this profound sense of rejection. But now in their 80s, they're starting to kind of reach the end of life and wondering about purpose and meaning. And they're still feeling through nightmares that sense of profound rejection and isolation. And that's what I'm wondering if, from what you're saying, Luke, the ayahuasca experience kind of spiritually heals you, but rejoins you to a community of a sort.
Yeah, no, I think especially with veterans, this sense of tribe is important. I think it's important to all human beings. We've had this forever, but veterans are often feel this loss more profoundly because they had this in the military. And when they come back to their civilization or culture and they get spit on, it strike deep wounds because it creates a spiritual crisis. Like, what was I doing this for if my own people, hate me for doing this? And actually, it's been really powerful. When I first came to Peru 10 years ago, it was all pretty much like young adventurers doing ayahuasca. But now we see much older people at the end of their life, wanting to have insight and change. It's been very beautiful. Many people from business, for example, you'll go, hey, I've been very successful my whole life. I own the biggest business in town. I have everything I ever want, and something's wrong, and I want to come here. So the same thing with veterans, that this can be a profound experience. It gives them um, at the end of life, people, or towards those ending years, people can look back and say, like, what was it all about? And it really can help them bring meaning to their lives.
Excellent.
Oh, Luke, I just wanted to express appreciation for sharing this wonderful information you have. And the last time I remember somebody talking about the importance of William Blake was Robert Bly when he was talking about the men's movement in the 80s. And it's really an overlooked area in our culture of the rite of passage that young men have in becoming mature and overcoming the sense of the collective shame that exists. And I had a comment about trying to find it feels like there's a paradox between finding the right amount of um, active imagination. That, of course, the I think the alchemists probably in the Middle Ages utilize the power of the imagination to be able to bring about profound changes. So it feels that this, I mean, I think there's a very delicate balance between the substance, whether we're using a material substance, whether it's a plant or whether it's just the active imagination that stretches our mind to be able to appreciate that state of powerful theta that you would touch. Somebody was just talking about the 6 beats a second. But yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this back north.
Yeah, no, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
I
you very
think
much.
Blake's a wonderful philosopher, and I think we underestimate imagination. I think imagination is a primary faculty. The consensus realities, analytical reality that most people live in of day-to-day consciousness really ignores so much part of the human experience and the human being. So I think this idea of imagination of the capital I is a profound mode of healing, insight, and way to navigate the world. I think it needs to be looked into more.
Thank you again. This was just superb. Excellent.
Right. Well, we're at the top of the hour, folks. So, Luke, incredibly powerful information. Do you have a preference if people have more questions for you in terms of an email or a way to contact you?
Yeah, so my email address is neuroenlightenment at gmail.com. And anyone has any questions, I'd be love to ask. And we do retreats now too. So if anyone works with veterans that want to come to Peru or anybody for that matter, we're down here for support. But yeah, I love any questions or anything along those lines. It'd be wonderful.
Beautiful. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. Great presentation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Okay, everybody, have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you Monday night with a map review.